On the evening of November 30th, 1939, a coded warning reaches the State Department in Washington from the American Embassy in Mexico City. Two German agents living quietly in Las Vegas, one of them a trained explosives expert, have been making repeated trips out to a massive concrete dam in the desert, scouting it from a rented fishing boat. Their plan: plant explosives against the dam's intake towers and cut the high-voltage lines running out of the canyon, blacking out the electricity that Southern California's aviation industry depended on. Stick around, because understanding why Hoover Dam became the target of an alleged Nazi sabotage plot means understanding one of the most audacious public works projects ever built: a concrete wall raised across a desert canyon that would go on to reshape the American Southwest. Long before any spy set foot near Las Vegas, engineers had their eye on the Colorado River. Since around 1900, planners had studied the river's Black Canyon and nearby Boulder Canyon for their potential to tame a waterway that flooded without warning, to store irrigation water for a growing Southwest, and to generate hydroelectric power on a scale nobody had attempted before. The obstacles were as big as the ambition. 7 states shared the river's basin, and without some agreement between them, the project risked drowning in litigation before a single shovel went into the ground. That agreement came in 1922, when representatives of California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming signed the Colorado River Compact, dividing the river's water between the upper and lower basins and creating the interstate framework the project needed. 6 years later, in December of 1928, President Calvin Coolidge signed the Boulder Canyon Project Act, authorizing construction and setting aside $165 million for the dam and its companion irrigation works. The site itself shifted during planning. Engineers studied both Boulder Canyon and the nearby Black Canyon, and chose Black Canyon for its combination of solid foundation rock, easier access, and a larger potential reservoir, though the project kept its original name for years afterward regardless. Congress had now authorized the dam. Nobody had yet proved that a dam this size could actually be built. When the government opened bidding in January of 1931, this was still, on paper, just another Bureau of Reclamation contract. In practice, no one had ever attempted a concrete structure of this size, and several of the construction techniques required had never been attempted at anything approaching this scale. A consortium calling itself 6 Companies, Incorporated, won the job with a bid of roughly $49 million, within roughly $24,000 of the government's own confidential estimate. Las Vegas, then a dusty town of about 5,000 people, lobbied hard to host the project's headquarters, even shutting down its speakeasies to look respectable for a visiting cabinet secretary. It didn't work. Officials instead ordered an entirely new, purpose-built town constructed in the desert near the dam site: Boulder City. 6 Companies put an engineer named Frank Crowe in charge of the site, a man who had spent 2 decades with the Bureau of Reclamation, pioneering the very cableway and pneumatic concrete systems this project would depend on. President Herbert Hoover, watching the Depression deepen by the week, pushed to start the project months earlier than originally planned, so it could start putting desperate men to work as fast as possible. Crowe drove his crews just as hard. He prowled the site at all hours, demanding relentless pace from the men below him, and it earned him a nickname that stuck for the rest of his career: Hurry Up Crowe. That urgency collided head-on with the reality of the Great Depression. Thousands of unemployed men and their families poured into Las Vegas, a town of only about 5,000 people, all chasing rumors of steady work. Camps sprang up around the dam site faster than anyone could house them. One, called McKeeversville, grew around the government surveyor's quarters, while another, officially named Williamsville but universally known as Ragtown, spread along the sweltering banks of the Colorado River itself. 6 Companies eventually put more than 5,000 men on the payroll at peak, though the contract itself used the racial hiring restrictions common at the time to exclude Chinese laborers outright, and the number of black workers the company did employ remained only a few dozen, kept in a segregated crew, issued separate water buckets from everyone else. The desert made its own demands. That first summer, 1931, temperatures in Black Canyon repeatedly climbed above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, while conditions inside the diversion tunnels, thick with vehicle exhaust and barely ventilated, could reach 140. Between late June and late July alone, 16 workers and other people living along the riverbank died of heat stroke. That August, when the company reassigned tunnel workers to lower-paid jobs without warning, the men tried to organize, demanding better pay along with clean water and safer conditions in the tunnels. A committee presented a short list of demands to Crowe directly. He gave them nothing, and instead threatened to shut the entire project down and lay off the workforce wholesale. Most of the men, fearing a violent standoff, took their pay and left for Las Vegas within days, and the walkout collapsed. A second, smaller labor dispute flared up in 1935 over lunch scheduling, but by then, the dam itself was nearly finished. None of the real construction could begin, though, until the Colorado River itself was moved out of the way. Crews drove 4 diversion tunnels through the canyon walls, 2 on the Nevada side and 2 on the Arizona side, each 56 feet across and, combined, stretching more than 3 miles through solid rock. Tunneling started in May of 1931. By November of the following year, workers detonated a temporary barrier and dumped enough blasted rubble into the river to force its entire flow into the 2 Arizona tunnels, leaving the streambed at the dam site dry. To keep that river from flooding straight back into the construction site, crews then built 2 cofferdams, temporary walls of packed earth and rock. The upper one alone stood 98 feet tall and, remarkably, was 750 feet thick at its base, thicker than the permanent dam that would eventually replace it. With the site finally dry, excavation crews faced a different danger entirely, loosening more than 1 million cubic yards of unstable rock from canyon walls hundreds of feet overhead. The men who did this work were known as high scalers, suspended on ropes from the canyon rim, clearing debris with jackhammers and dynamite while dangling in open air. Falling rock and tools were the single greatest killer on the entire site, which meant the high scalers' dangerous work actually protected everyone working below them. To guard against the debris themselves, some began dipping cloth hats in tar and letting them harden into makeshift shells. When the trick proved it could stop a blow that would otherwise crack a skull, 6 companies ordered thousands of commercial protective hats for the whole crew and required their use, helping turn the hard hat from an industrial novelty into standard construction safety equipment. The high scalers became a tourist attraction in their own right, swinging tools and even crates of dynamite hand-to-hand across the canyon on their ropes for onlookers below. One of them, high scaler Oliver Cowan, once heard the sound of a slipping safety line and looked up to see a government engineer losing his grip some 25 feet above him. Cowan swung out on his own rope, caught the falling man by the leg, and held him until a second high scaler, Arnold Parks, swung over to pin him safely against the canyon wall. But the most dangerous problem was one nobody could see from the canyon floor. Beneath all of that, engineers drilled hundreds of holes as deep as 150 feet into the canyon rock and pumped them full of grout, sealing cracks that could otherwise let water seep beneath the dam's foundation. As Lake Mead filled behind the finished dam, engineers discovered that the original grout curtain was not performing as intended. Beginning in the late 1930s, they drilled deeper supplemental holes from galleries inside the dam and spent years strengthening the barrier beneath it, a retrofit that took nearly a decade to complete. The concrete itself posed its own puzzle. Engineers calculated that if the dam's enormous mass were poured in one continuous block, the heat released as it cured would take some 125 years to fully dissipate, cracking the structure from the inside out long before that. Instead, the dam was built as an interlocking mosaic of rectangular columns, some 50 feet square, each filled with a network of 1-inch steel pipes that circulated first river water and then ice-cold water from an on-site refrigeration plant, cooling every column artificially before the next layer went on top. Crowe's own cableway system, the very technology he had spent his career perfecting, used 20-ton cableways to carry 8 cubic yard buckets of concrete overhead and drop a fresh one into place roughly every minute and a quarter. Each bucket raised the surface of its column by only a few inches, which is one reason the legend of workers being buried inside the concrete makes little sense. By the time pouring finally stopped in May of 1935, the dam itself contained 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete, with over 1 million more used in the power plant and surrounding structures, connected by more than 500 miles of cooling pipe. According to the Bureau of Reclamation's own figuring, that much concrete would pave a 2-lane highway clear across the country, from San Francisco to New York. 6 companies had 7 years under its contract to finish the job. The first concrete went in on June 6, 1933, 18 months ahead of even that accelerated schedule, and the federal government formally took possession of the completed dam on March 1, 1936, more than 2 years early. In between, a formal dedication ceremony on September 30, 1935, drew 10,000 people despite temperatures over 100 degrees, timed to coincide with a Western tour by President Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt gave the dedication speech without once mentioning the name of the man the dam was unofficially named after. Herbert Hoover, who as Commerce Secretary had helped broker the very compact that made the project possible, wasn't even invited. That slight was no accident. In September of 1930, Interior Secretary Ray Wilbur had formally named the structure Hoover Dam, citing a tradition of naming dams after presidents. After Hoover lost his re-election bid in 1932, the incoming Roosevelt administration's own Interior Secretary, Harold Ickes, had his department stop using the name Hoover Dam and revert to Boulder Dam in official government usage, the name that had stuck to the project informally for years anyway. It didn't fully take hold. Memories of the Depression eventually faded. Hoover's public standing recovered somewhat through his humanitarian work during and after the Second World War, and in 1947, Congress voted unanimously to restore the name Hoover Dam for good. None of that argument changes what the dam actually cost to build. 96 deaths were officially classified as industrial fatalities during construction. Broader historical counts, which include deaths connected to the wider project before construction even began, often reach 112. The very first came in May of 1921, when a Bureau of Reclamation employee fell from a survey barge on the Colorado River, years before construction even began. A second surveyor drowned in a flash flood while scouting the site the following year. The final death on the official list carries a detail almost too precise to be coincidence. On December 20, 1935, an electrician's helper named Patrick Tierney fell from one of the intake towers on the Arizona side and died. His father, John Gregory Tierney, was that same surveyor who had drowned scouting the site 13 years earlier to the very day. Not every death made even that broader count. A further 42 men died of what the company recorded as pneumonia, deaths that were never added to the official total. Workers at the time argued this was a convenient cover story for carbon monoxide poisoning caused by gasoline-powered vehicles running inside diversion tunnels that could reach well over 100 degrees and filled with exhaust, and that classifying the deaths as pneumonia let the company avoid paying compensation. Whatever the true cause, no evidence has ever supported the darker legend that any worker was actually buried alive inside the poured concrete itself. By the time the dam's turbines were fully humming in the late 1930s, its power plant had already become the largest hydroelectric facility on Earth, and its electricity was feeding an aviation industry across Southern California that the United States would soon need more than ever. Which is exactly what made it a target in November of 1939. American intelligence, tipped off in time, moved fast. Private boats were banned from the lake near the dam. Floodlights lit up the intake towers around the clock, and a steel mesh net was strung across the water to keep any vessel from getting within 300 feet of the towers themselves. The plot never got further than reconnaissance. After the attack on Pearl Harbor 2 years later, authorities closed the dam to all public visitors entirely for the remainder of the war, reopening its gates only in September of 1945. Nearly a century after Frank Crowe first walked the floor of an empty desert canyon, Hoover Dam still stands exactly where 6 companies built it, still holding back the reservoir known as Lake Mead, still sending power across Nevada, Arizona, and California. It survived the depression that built it, the labor disputes that tested it, the desert heat that killed 16 men in a single month, and a sabotage plot built around something as ordinary as a rented fishing boat. Today, it draws millions of visitors every year, drawn to a structure that was, and in many ways still is, one of the most ambitious things human beings have ever poured in concrete. So here's a question worth sitting with. A project this size, built this fast, cost dozens of lives even by the official count. Deaths from heat, from falls, from tunnels, nobody today would consider safe to work in. Given what we now know about worker safety, would a government today ever approve a project on this timeline again? Or does building anything on this scale always mean someone pays a price the finished structure never shows? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And if this look at the dam that was once the target of an alleged Nazi sabotage plot gave you a new appreciation for what's sitting quietly in the Nevada desert, give this video a like, subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most ambitious engineering projects, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what we build next.